Greetings! Welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm. This video is going to be the second in the little series on drawing your own patterns and plans that we're currently working on here with the channel. Previously I talked about drawing carving patterns in real size by taking lines from an existing pattern. What I want to talk about today is transferring patterns either from an image to paper or from paper in one size to paper in another size. This process also works with something that you've done, that you're working on from a photograph. And it allows you both to transfer the image and to put the image at any size scale you wish. Okay, we're going to talk about working with a grid to do that, how to think about that, and how to run through the process. Before we get into that, I want to just give a little background on a specific project that I'm working on that you will see more here on the channel, where I did that, where I used this as my process for getting started. And that was making these little casting patterns. So it's really useful to have paperweights when you're doing drafting and making drawings, right? There's a specific kind of paperweight called a drafting duck. And it's a little oval piece of lead, and it has a little wire which comes out and goes down at a 90-degree angle like that. And it's for pushing on a batten. Okay, so if you're trying to play connect the dots like we did in the previous video like this, you can use the French curves that I showed you in that video for small pieces and tight curves. But if you want wide sweeping curves, or you're working on something that's very large, like a full-scale boat lofting or something of the likes there, you're going to need a flexible batten to span those points, and you need a paperweight that can push on the batten, both to hold it down and to push it sideways. Like one will push it here and anchor it to that point, and then another will grab it and pull it down to the next point, right? So you're pushing these battens along to match all those points and hold it there while you take your pencil and scribe the line. Now, those drafting ducks are called drafting ducks because they have like an oval body and vaguely a beak. But I thought, you know what, if we're going to make a drafting duck, let's make a drafting duck.
Let's make it cute.
Let's make it cute, exactly. So these are little carvings in maple, right? Not pine this time. These are in maple because I wanted the durability. And they're composite. They've been made in several pieces. This one is a merganser with babies on her back, and this is one of the ducks that'll do that, that'll carry their babies around like that. This one is a loon, and again, that would push the batten this way, right? And this one is just a ruddy duck, just as a straight paperweight. Okay, so these are going to be casted in bronze, is my ultimate plan here. So I still have to make a match plate and some of the equipment for doing this casting project. I'll take you along for that ride here later on in the channel. It's just haven't had time to get into it here lately. I have most of what I need, but I need to make a couple little parts yet. So these are those casting patterns. I made those by rescaling other historic decoys out of pattern books and references. Okay, and this is the drawings for that project. Right there's the loon. That one came out pretty nice, in the ruddy duck. There's a shorebird that I haven't carved yet, but you know, like this was my first attempt at a merganser, and I thought that looks really stupid. It looks like it's got fire out of its head. I don't like that. So made a couple more. There's a couple more shorebirds, curlew, and an oyster cracker. And then this one ended up being the final merganser, the pattern for the carving that I just showed you. Okay, these I haven't. There we go. Is it in a frame?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, these I haven't carved yet either. Oh, my paper's tearing. But as you can see, I'm relying heavily on a grid system to make, scale, and transfer these patterns. So what I want to do in this video, I can do this without tearing that perforation any farther, okay, is to take this sketch of a pattern for a full-sized merganser decoy. This was based on historic examples, but I've done a little bit of my own modification there. Kind of a combination of historic and some photographs, right, to pull a little more realism in it. But I'm going to take this and I'm going to rescale it to a miniature that would be about the same size as this one. So I'll get my area set up and I'll show you how we do it. Now, in order to do this, we're going to need to draw two separate grids at two different scales. That's the whole thing that makes this work. So this is a piece of paper upon which I will draw the pattern. So this will be drawn literal size, the literal size of the pattern that I'm making. Then here we have the original drawing, and this will be scaled at a different proportion so that I have the same number of grid squares on here as on my literal pattern, but they're going to be a different size. And that difference in size will determine how much we're scaling up or scaling down. Now when I do this, there's enough going on in this page already. I don't want to add more confusion to the original drawing, so I have a piece of tracing paper on here, and I will draw the grid onto the tracing paper rather than onto the original. But first, I want to do the literal scale grid. So this can be any size, right? This is somewhat arbitrary. When I was making these, I was making them the size I wanted my paperweight, not a literal scaling to the living bird. Okay, so this loon and this merganser here are about the same size. Actually, the merganser is slightly larger in terms of body mass, even though the loon is at least a third larger than the merganser. Right? Loons are a goose-sized bird, whereas mergansers are just a big duck. So, you know, it's obviously somewhat counterfactual in that way. But that's okay, right? It serves its purpose. So I'm going to arbitrarily say that I want my bird to be 20 centimeters long. Now, I am using metric. We're going to need to do some math to calculate our scale differential, and that is much, much, much easier if you just use metric. Okay? So the start of this is to draw a reference lines. Okay, I'm going to go, actually I'll go 2 centimeters up. I have plenty of space. Okay, go 2 centimeters up, 2 centimeters over from the corner of the page. Now I'll just line this up initially with the edge of the page. Draw that out there. And now I will line up with that line. Paper is never literally square. Okay? So now I have a reference point. From there, I will measure over 1 centimeter 20 times. Put that one in the wrong spot. Okay. And then up here, 1 centimeter. I'll probably go up 10 times to start. I'm not sure how many I will need. Okay. And then we will draw lines in both directions, always squaring off to these two initial reference lines. The reason I'm doing that is that paper is never cut perfectly square. So you always need to strike an initial reference and then draw everything from that reference. Otherwise, you will always have your lines either converging or diverging, depending on which way your paper is inaccurate. Okay? And I'm just going to go along. Now, drawing grid squares is boring. So I will do that off camera in a minute. But first, I want to show you how we're working with this. So we arbitrarily decided that our finished piece is going to be 20 centimeters long. Okay? I need to measure the maximum dimension of length here. Okay, we're going to base it on length. The height is just going to be whatever it is. I don't care. So we're going to measure this. And I measured that to 46 centimeters. So I just divide by 20. Right? I'm going to have 20 increments on my finished drawing. So I want 20 increments on my initial drawing. So just measure what it is, divide by 20. That comes out to 23 millimeters per square. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing over here. Start with a reference line, and I will allow the reference line to match one edge of the paper. Okay, though my square is not quite long enough. Let me fix my paper clip. Do clip this down, otherwise you will have nothing but trouble. Okay, so I'll just extend that over there, and then I will actually use this edge since I squared this line to that edge. I don't have room to draw another line. It's not ideal, but it's good enough. Now I'm going to take my ruler again, and this time I'm going to mark every 23 millimeters. Okay? And this is why I say just use the metric system. Because when you're doing this kind of math, I'm talking, and I just mark 13 instead of 23. Talking instead of doing is always dangerous. Okay? And then again, up the side. Right? 23, 23, 23. And then we will do exactly the same thing. This time that one edge is my initial measurement. And I'll extend that over. And then up that way, right? So again, we're just going to draw the grid all the way across. Okay? So, I'm going to do this boring stuff off camera, and we'll turn the camera back on when we're ready to actually sketch our new pattern. We have both of our grids, and there's exactly the same number of squares on the full-size drawing as on the miniature drawing. The difference is the scale, okay? And the scaling here is, 1 to 2.3, really. So it's kind of an odd scale, but it's just how it fell out. Now, so that you can see better what I'm doing, I transferred the image from the page onto the tracing paper. I usually don't do that because I like to reuse these pieces of tracing paper, right? But for this video, and because it's sort of an odd scale that I probably won't use again for a different project, at least not often, I just went ahead and transferred that so that it's easier for you to see, translates better through the camera lens. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look along this line where the line of the duck outline intersects a line of the grid. Okay? So I like to kind of do this in quadrants and look at where they come together at an intersection. So right here, this is the bottom of the flat section of the duck. Okay? And then, I drew that a little funny, but right here is the bottom of the flat section of the duck. Right? So if I count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? 4, 5, 6, 7. Right there is the end of the flat section. And then I have, counting this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where it remains flat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So that identifies this region. Now to make a good paperweight, this drawing, we will make alterations to this. A paperweight isn't the same as a decoy that's supposed to float in the water. This round bottom will help it move in the water a little bit, but if we're using this paperweight, we don't want to move on the desk. So we will modify this. But for now, it's a reference point. Okay? And now here where the breast comes in and meets with this line, that's 1, 2, 3 up from the bottom. 1, 2, 3. So I will mark in that. Okay? So there's a couple of references. Now, I'll start here at the breast and I'll come down and see where does this next intersect the line. So this intersects the next lowest line just a little bit to the right of the halfway point. So I'll put a dot there. And now this is about, it intersects the next vertical about a third of the way up. Then it intersects that cross point. And the next vertical, it's about a third of the way down. Here it's about a third of the way from the bottom. Here it's almost down. Here it's just off of the bottom. Okay? So there is a set of dots that we can now just freehand sketch through that set of points and have a portion of our duck body. Now we're going to do the same thing but going up. So the next horizontal, we're at about the halfway point. The next vertical, we're at about the halfway point. Okay. Then the next horizontal, we just kind of cut off this corner right there. The next vertical, we're at about the halfway point. Yeah. Okay. Then we go up through this horizontal. And now the beak is coming across about halfway through this next vertical. This is about a third in there. So that curve, I'll go ahead and draw that in. Okay, so where you have that curve under the beak. Now the beak is going to be angling down, so we have this halfway mark. The next one, it goes right through that intersection. And then about halfway down this one. So that's a nice even line there. Now the tip is going to come out here somewhere. It crosses below this intersection, kind of cuts off that. We're about halfway up the next vertical, and then we kind of cut off that. Okay, so let's get this beak in. So again, this is a rough outline. Don't be afraid to modify it. There's going to be inaccuracies in a hand-drawn grid like this. As I already mentioned, we're taking a floating decoy that's supposed to bob and wobble in the water and make it into a paperweight, which is supposed to just sit there, right? So there's going to be some accuracies in the grid system. We're also going to make some deliberate alterations once we have our initial sketch. Okay? But you can see how we're going along here. The grid is the tedious part, but once we get going pretty good. Now, if I look at where these meet, I'm just going to go up and refine the head here. So I'm going to go up 1, 2 intersections. 1, 2 intersections, and it's just a little bit above that. Okay. Now I'm going to draw the rounded head, so these guys can have a crest, or the crest can be depressed. They don't always show the crest, so I'm going to draw this both ways. Let me refine myself on my drawing right there. That's kind of the forehead transitions there. Okay. Goes over roughly evenish there. Goes just on the other side of this intersection. Then here, this is just a little bit shy of half. And this is just a little bit above that intersection. We pretty much nail this intersection. Okay? So from here, my forehead, these don't have a super pronounced forehead. Just sort of round. That came out. So this came out a little bit flat looking. So I'm just going to give it a little bit more fullness there. Okay. Now if I come in and put the crest in, crest starts one intersection back. Okay, if I go up, it's just a little bit proud of the head there. Here it's about the halfway point, but I filled out this head a little bit, so I'm just going to go up a little bit more. Okay, we'll come through here, and then we're about at the halfway point here. About at the halfway point here. Then it intersects right about there. Okay. Now I'm going to modify the crest a little bit. I need to turn my paper here just a smidge. You see this I want relatively straight, and it kind of ended up a little bit concave here. So again, I'm just going to deliberately draw a bit proud of those marks. These are guidelines, not edicts that must be followed, right? So now we're looking at this neckline right below, right at this intersection here, okay? Now this kind of cuts off this corner, kind of ends up here, right? So we just kind of cut off that corner, and we're just a little bit behind that line. So that's a convenient section to just sketch in like so. Okay. Now we're at this intersection. We're just a little bit proud of it. The next vertical, about halfway point of the next vertical, about 3/4 point of the next vertical, and then here, there's our height. This is just a little shy. Now we're back to about that 3/4 mark, halfway mark. So it's just a little proud. We kind of go through the middle, through the top, and now we're heading over toward our tail. Okay. So next one back, third, about half, coming back up. We're kind of coming to a tip here. Okay? And then we can sketch this little humped back in.
Onyx has something to say.
There's Onyx the rooster here in the background. He wants to be part of our video too. And again, right, I'm using these lines as guidelines, and I'm drawing it so that it's pleasing to my eye at the end of the day. Okay? So now we're going to come down, and we're just a little bit below this intersection. We'll mark that. Now we hit this intersection pretty much right on. Next line, we're at about the halfway point. Make a little dot. We hit the next intersection. Next line, we're about the halfway point. This line, we're about a third of the way up. And then from here, we're just tapering into the bottom. Now I'm going to stop using my initial pattern. I have enough information here. I want to extend this bottom to about here and about here. So I'm going to deviate anyway. Right? So I want to put this in like this. I'm just going to redraw this belly line. So it's up like that. I'm just going to come in from here. And this seems like a reasonable place to bring this tail down. Bring that down like that. But instead of following these lines, I'm just going to go right ahead and kind of draw a curve which is congruent to that, but converges with the rise to the tail. Loose semi-congruency. I'm inventing words now. Okay? And now, does it look good? Do I like that? Well, let me get my eraser here. Just want to remove this. This isn't the best eraser. It's okay. It's good enough for the job we're doing. And I do like this line. That's a pretty reasonable line. This will give 4, 5, about 5 inches, 5.5 inches or so of contact with the surface that it's weighing down. But I don't like this quite so much, and this breast is raised up too high. So I'm going to kind of, instead of think of this as the intersecting point, I'm going to think of this as the intersecting point and lower that whole orientation. But again, kind of, except for where I have to converge, I'm trying to keep these lines approximately in the same orientation, just a little bit lower. And we'll converge there. And this is that modification. I've never done this, that I don't end up modifying at least a little bit from the original. Because I often have a different purpose, or I would have just left it the original size. And you have to change it to meet the new purpose. And, like I said, there's always a little bit of error when you're hand drawing a grid. That's okay, right? So yeah, I like that a lot better. Just kind of darken that line in a bit. Okay, I like this whole half a lot. I like that orientation. But what I don't like is this line's just a little bit too straight. So I'm going to erase that. I think the neckline is fine. I'm just going to come out a little bit. Make it a little bit fuller in that region. There. So there we have it. We have rescaled the original decoy pattern that would be an actual size decoy to float on an actual lake in actual hunting situations, and converted it to a little miniature that would be a nice paperweight at the same scale as these little guys, using the grid system. It's not difficult. It's a little bit tedious. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's not at all difficult to do this. Okay? So if you're worried about drawing your own patterns and thinking, oh, I could never do that, just do this. Make yourself a grid. And here I started with a large and reduced it. You could also start with this being the image in a book, and you want to scale it out to a full-sized pattern to make a full-sized decoy, or a full-sized bird carving, or a first full-sized mammal carving, or whatever you're doing. Right? You could want to carve a black bear, and you have a photograph of a black bear. Right? You want to scale it to something life-size or half-life-size or whatever. It's exactly the same process. You would just have the tracing paper with your small grid on top of the photo, and then a full-sized grid on top of a piece of construction paper, okay? And scale it up from a photo in a book. And then once you have that, just trust your eye and tweak it and make it look right. Usually when you're going up from a photograph is always going to be a little bit tilted, right? And when you're drawing a pattern, you want it to be a true pattern with that flat side, or this end view, or that front view, and the photograph is usually something like that. Okay? Right? You know, you won't get it perfectly side on. You'll get it like that. Okay? So when you do this from a photograph, it will almost always come out looking a little out of scale. When you're looking at the photograph, your eye will just fill in those gaps naturally. But when you just have an outline like this, it won't do that anymore. So you'll see, oh, that paw looks too thin. So, okay, I'll just draw it a little bit more full in that region. And then the head looks smashed this way, so I'll draw it a little bit more full that way. Okay? Just using like a bear example, or a moose, or whatever you want to carve, right? Whatever you want to carve. So do this, try this, practice this in a couple of settings. The best photographs for this sort of work, I think, come from field guides rather than just trolling the internet to find a photograph. That's fine, but when you have a field guide, they're more selecting for an image which is as close to square as humanly possible. So the maker of the field guide has done a lot of that work for you because they're trying to show information rather than just a pretty picture of a duck or a bear or a moose in its habitat, right? So those are really good sources. Photo books and like collector's magazines are really good sources of images for things like decoys and other carvings. Because again, they're trying to show information more than just take a pretty picture of a critter in its habitat. Right? So if you have a collector's book of like Black Forest bears, let's say you want to carve a bear and you want to use one of those, going to like auction catalogs and collector's catalogs and collector's books and things like that are really good sources where you have it as square as possible, but it's still never perfect. So you're going to have to modify it a little bit once you get it to the drawing stage. So do that. And if you get it and it's not at the scale you want, just do it again. Not a big deal. You can also often rescale these very easily. If you just say, oh, that's just a smidgen too small, you can just come and draw another line outside just by following the contours exactly the same and keeping it a constant distance around, and have it ever so slightly bigger or ever so slightly smaller. Okay? Depending on whether you go on the outside or the inside of that. Right? So this gives you a lot of flexibility. And it is a skill that I would encourage you to practice as you developed in your craft and in the arts that you're working on. Okay? So, I'm going to put this down here. The next video in this series, we're going to start to look at mechanical drawings for furniture making or building, and like building chicken coop or making a piece of furniture. That sort of technical drawing. This is a little bit more artsy. That's more precise. So it's a slightly different mindset, and I want to give you those skills as well. So if you've enjoyed this, I would be most grateful if you give it a thumbs up, because the YouTube algorithm loves that and knows to show it to other folks because you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will continue following along in this series here at Old Ways Rising Farm. Till then, have a blessed day.